one of their colleagues is back in Washington anchoring the effort here while Jenna Ellis and Rudy are out in Arizona. That would be Boris Epshteyn. Boris, thank you for joining us today. Give us a view of the battlefield. We've had some bad news out of Pennsylvania, but great news out of Arizona. A real fight down in Georgia. We're hearing great news out of Wisconsin, although you wouldn't know that from the media. So walk us around. Maybe let's start in Arizona, where this hearing is going on today, and literally the level of detail. And by the way, I think as good as Gettysburg was, this was actually better for the analytics, the way you guys laid it out, because it left a brutal case that it was mathematically impossible for this to be pulled off by the Biden campaign. So, Boris, why don't we start in Arizona with your thoughts, and let's go from there.
I think Arizona has been an absolute home run on several fronts. Talking about machines that were connected to the internet and easily hacked, talking about Republican observers excluded from the process, no signature verification on the mail ballots, indications of batches of ballots infused to evade detection, forensic audit that is needed to specifically identify which votes may or may not have been switched. I mean, the in-depth, as you mentioned, the in-depth facts that have been presented here, the analysis that have been presented here, absolutely underscore how much of a disaster this election in Arizona and around the country has been, and how much more information has to get out there in order to determine who won the most legal votes in Arizona and in the states we're talking about throughout the country. But again, specifically in Arizona, as you mentioned, and comparable to the way that Gettysburg went, there's been an overwhelming amount of detail presented, to the point where then the question has to be asked, how can the leaders of the Arizona Senate and House, and how can the governor of Arizona not call a special session of the legislature to determine what exactly happened in Arizona and who won the most legal votes? So if you look at Arizona, the more and more ground is forming for that determination. Georgia, as you said, it's a fight. The campaign is now.
But hold on. Before I get to Georgia, while we're there, sure. What's the process from here going forward? Because this is not a special session. This is kind of an extra ordinary hearing. You're having an incredible amount of detail of evidence, actual evidence. Where do you go from here? Do you go back to court, or does Ducey call a special session and you actually present this to the legislative branch?
The hope is to be able to present it to the legislative branch and also to exhaust our legal options, and more information is going to be coming out about that in the next 24 to 48 hours on that front. But specifically on what's happening today, you're right. This is a hearing of legislators. The goal is that the information presented will make it inevitable that the legislature of Arizona calls itself or is called into special session by Governor Doug Ducey in order for all this evidence to be presented before the electors are actually sent from Arizona to Congress.
Because the Republican administration out there, like putting it in your face, actually certified the vote in the middle of the hearing.
They did. And we've talked about that on the show before, Steve. It is disappointing and bewildering that there are Republicans out there who want to rush the process instead of going through the motions, going through the paces, going through the facts, and determining something that's so reasonable to want to determine who won this election, who won the most legal votes. Was there wrongdoing in this election? And if you look at the information, if you look at the analysis, if you look at the experts, more and more it's coming out that, as you started this conversation with, there's nothing else that one could consider except for the fact that there was chicanery, the extreme chicanery that went on throughout this election process in states like Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Nevada.
Tomorrow is 1 December. You've got two options you're dealing with in Arizona. One, you've got votes, but you've also now got evidence. And this thing is so close there, it's just 10,000. I think the illegal alien vote they're talking about alone is 2x that. But it's about time. You've got the safe harbor on the 8th. You've got the Electoral College, which is the hardwired, can't go beyond, on the 14th of December. So essentially you got,
13th, right.
I don't know, 15 days, maybe 14. And you're taking two tracks. One's courts and the other special session. You're not there to either one yet. You haven't filed court, and you're tonight have your evidence, and you'll go with cup in hand and beseech the all-powerful Governor Ducey to get the Secretary of State and make something happen. When do you start running out of time in Arizona, do you think?
But it's actually not quite correct on the court front. If you remember last week, a very important lawsuit was filed with Kelly Ward, the GOP chairwoman, as the plaintiff, in order to dig deeply into the balloting in Maricopa County in terms of whether observers were allowed, in terms of whether signatures match, and in terms of whether the reconstructed or duplicate fixed ballots were handled correctly. And there's now been action in that case, in that and then ballots are going to be inspected. 100 signatures are going to be inspected. 100 duplicate ballots are going to be inspected. So there is activity on the court side, on the judicial side, and as you said, on the legislative side, there's the in-depth hearing today, and on the information that's being put out there, the extreme support that's out there for this session today, this hearing today. From what I understand, 1,000 or more people outside of the hearing who are voicing their support and voicing the necessity to determine who won the legal votes in the state of Arizona. So my perspective is that there's plenty of time, both on the court front, on the legal front, and on the legislative front.
Let's go to Wisconsin, because the mainstream media, you wouldn't know it. It's saying, oh, Trump paid $3 million and he's down another 100 votes. But they didn't report the buried lead that from 100,000 to 150,000 ballots that conservative groups and the campaign separately are arguing easily should be thrown out. Where do we stand with Wisconsin right now?
Well, exactly right. We've talked about this, and the media is doing the same thing in Arizona as they're doing in Wisconsin. What they don't realize is that the time to make these the election contests in these states is after this quote-unquote certification. And all the certification that is not a constitutional process. That is just a really clerical. This is a clerical move that's made. That's all it is. So these quote-unquote certifications, they don't mean that electors have sent. That means that there's a clerical determination on the election, but that doesn't mean that contests are exhausted. So in Wisconsin, this recount has been finished. The results of the recount were expected because the Democrat to Republican count is 2-1 on those folks who adjudicate any contest on any specific ballots, both in Milwaukee and in Dane County. And now that sets up an opportunity to press our case further and to go and make it clear that, as you said, 100,000, 150,000, or as many as 200,000 ballots should not be counted because they contravene Wisconsin Constitution, Wisconsin law, which states, as we've talked about, that voting by mail, absentee voting, are a privilege. They're not a right. And there are 3 classifications of wrongful ballots that are being looked at. One is where an application was not granted, but an absentee or mail-in vote happened. 2 is where the clerks mishandled on purposely mishandled an application or a ballot. And 3, the confined fraction of folks who are supposed to be indefinitely confined, but they're determined to have not been so, but have said they were in order to be able to vote by mail or absentee. So again, you look at all these classifications, and from what I understand, what we expected to happen happened, which is the numbers that you talk about in a state where the difference is 20,000 votes in these 2 counties, Milwaukee and Dane, which are 70-30, 80-20 Biden-Trump. The numbers of ballots which should not be counted are apparently in the 100,000 and above range, which is extremely significant.
So how do you get that to get them to flip? Is that you're going to use the court system there? You don't go back to the legislature? Is this the courts? You're going to take this information and now ask for a forensic audit, or now do you go right to court and say these ballots got to be thrown out?
Don't want to get out of the process, but again, as I've said this to you before, and I think it's proven out to be correct, we will exhaust every single option we have in order to make sure that only the legal ballots in Wisconsin are counted.